All right, everyone, thank you so much for your patience. We really appreciate you staying with us as we got the technology all sorted. I want to welcome everyone to our presentation today. The ASM program is so pleased to be hosting Stephanie George, who is a doctoral candidate in ethnomusicology at the Graduate Center at City University of New York. She's been doing some amazing work in New York City, Guyana, and Trinidad, looking at the significance of music and sonic practices as a spirit mediumship and Indo-Caribbean Mariamman Kali goddess worship, and also, which is also known as Madrasi Religion. We are so happy to hear a little bit more about your research, and also Stephanie will be teaching a new course in the ASM program this spring called Asian American, Sonic Reverberations of Asian America, correct? Yes. It's a great, incredible course that we're excited to be offering. So with that, go ahead and take it away, Stephanie.
Thank you for that, Rupa. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today. To begin, I'd like to thank the University of Pennsylvania's program in Asian American Studies and members of the steering committee, particularly Fariha Khan and Josephine Park, for inviting me to come today to speak about the new course and about my current research. Rupa Pillai, again, a special thanks to you for reaching out, and Annabelle for all the coordination for this event. I look forward to meeting others today in the faculty, and especially excited to meet students who help make this program, as I hear, as vibrant and dynamic as it is. And for those who are observing today, happy Diwali. By way of introducing myself and my background as a scholar, I take us back to when I enrolled, and I'm still in, the ethnomusicology program at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. Initially, I had sought to specialize in a topic that was not about Guyanese, Indo-Caribbean American music, religiosity, and race. Prior to graduate school and after my time at the College of William and Mary, I lived in southern India for 2 years working for a tsunami disaster relief organization based in Chennai, Tamil Nadu. And during stints to neighboring countries for related relief projects, I met Sufi Muslim musicians whose transformative performances I thought I would write about, maybe later. But post-tsunami relief life, I enrolled in the ethnomusicology program at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, where I trained with folklorists and ethnomusicologists in the music and popular culture studies programs to write a thesis about the globalization of Indian popular film music, specifically the soundtrack to Slumdog Millionaire and music by the artist A.R. Rahman. I described how I hadn't expected to leave India, only to hear India as part of US popular music culture when I returned. In retrospect, I think my master's thesis was largely motivated by my interests at the time to understand the increasing presence and shifting aesthetic preferences shared by diverse North American audiences for South Asian popular music. I analyzed the music as a phenomenon in the context of mid-late 2000s America, which seemed to defy norms of dominant culture, while maybe transcending also the boundaries of diaspora as a concept. Back to New York. Living and conducting fieldwork in New York City, I became more aware of the import of diaspora for a myriad of self-identified communities. For many Indo-Caribbeans in New York, being part of a diaspora extends beyond belonging to the boundaries of the nation state, whether Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, or Martinique, from where they migrated or their family migrated in the 20th century, to ancestral territories of India, where their foreparents embarked for the New World throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. In many instances, second-generation Indo-Caribbean Americans who have not physically traveled to or resided in Guyana or Trinidad, for instance, seek belonging to South Asian American diaspora culture more fervently than previous generations. On one hand, there are ongoing attempts by Indo-Caribbeans to be part of South Asian American diaspora culture. On the other hand, there are also deeply felt ambivalences about what it means or what are the expectations to belong to it. Indo-Caribbeans internalized an otherness felt to exist between themselves and, as Indo-Caribbeans say, India people, on the basis of perceived notions of loss of culture, such as, quote, losing one's language or culinary traditions. In my work, I examined this discursive process with regards to music, Guyanese musical performance and tradition within the context of religion, religious beliefs and practices. So now I'll get into some of the specifics of my research. 4 years after, by the way, yes, I forgot about PowerPoint.
Yeah.
There we go. So this was a map provided when I was describing some of the places that I have done research that I specialize in. There's Guyana, next in green, next to Suriname there on the South American continent, other Caribbean nation states in relation to North America, and in relation to New York City as well. I think I might have us somewhere over here when I was describing. Okay, we're getting there. Okay. Okay. 4 years after the emancipation of slavery in the British West Indies in 1834, the first group of South Asian indentured laborers arrived in British Guyana, now Guyana, to work primarily on sugar plantations at the request of state owners and with the support of the East India Company. Indentured laborers worked under 5-year contracts in the British colony, and they had the option to return to India or other countries where they were recruited, including China, for instance. Indentured laborers from India were usually referred to as, quote, coolies, a term today that remains controversial. Due to extremely poor working conditions and abuse, the British government, under the pressure of the Anti-Slavery Society, suspended indentureship to the colony the same year it started. But under new guidelines and regulations, supposedly, South Asian immigration resumed in British Guyana and elsewhere in 1845 to 1917. Yeah, I have some of this outlined here. 1917, in which over 500,000 people were recruited to labor in the New World. So I just had some of these terms up here in case anyone was unfamiliar with them, including, indentured laborers, coolies, as I mentioned, that term that was given. And then to back up here, just some colonial maps of British Guyana, again, where we are, the capital being Georgetown, and the field work that I did mostly in the eastern part of Guyana towards the border of Suriname. So I'll get to this. Madrasi, a British appellation for the minority of South Asians who embarked for the New World via the southern port of the Madras Presidency of the British Empire during the indentureship period. Within the plantation context of British Guyana, Madrasis were marginalized as they came to represent one of the various social categories that emerged via multiple and overlapping conceptions of race, skin color, and also ways of worshiping and creating music. Meanwhile, ideas that there were ideas that valorized or gave preference to lighter skin in the South Asian subcontinental context, and often conflated with geographic regions, stereotypes about darker skinned Indians in the South. Such color stigma was assimilated into Guyanese society as well. These kinds of racial hierarchies in the West Indies, and specifically in this colony of British Guyana, emerged within a larger context of colonial production of knowledge, and the kind of knowledge that I'm looking at here. I have this slide. I do not, I apologize. I was just going to outline here just some of these bodies of knowledge, right, in the 19th century, such as British evolutionary thinking about race, for instance, British Orientalism. Perhaps you've come across ideas about Orientalism in your classes, and European Enlightenment perceptions about, quote unquote, right, the proper relationships between music, religion, sound, and the body. The sonic and the supernatural, how much should we communicate with the supernatural and to what degree? Colonizers considered the sounds and styles of state-sanctioned British Christian worship as sonic reflections of Victorian ideals. Again, Victorian ideals at the time, such as respectability, righteousness, especially with regard to your comportment, how you handle yourself, how you hold your body, and in terms of music, right? Corporeal or vocal restraint, self-restraint. All of these kinds of connections and correlations I argued in my research. I analyzed how they were critically shaped by colonizers and later the colonized. They too were conceptualizing, thinking about, evaluating, cultural difference amongst themselves. and specifically with regards to race and what might become official kinds of religion. So thanks for your patience with these slides. Here's just some images of the Madras presidency again, just to sort of show here that the Madras presidency was more than the present day states of Tamil Nadu and the ethnic linguistic groups of Tamil speaking people today. In fact, encompassed quite a large region of the eastern and lower central portions of South Asia. So let me just move here for now. Over time, Madrasi became associated with people who performed and participated in an ecstatic mode of worship in veneration of a particular Hindu goddess, now mostly referred to as Kali. By ecstatic, that term, I mean relatively unrestrained styles of music and other sonic practices. And also allow me to clarify sonic practices. Here, I'm just referring to all of the features of this particular religion, for instance, that involve a musical component. Rituals that are facilitated by particular sounds and music, such as spirit possession. Now, coming to this term, the term spirit possession is somewhat problematic because there's multiple meanings for how people understand what's happening to them when a deity or a spirit enters their body. So Indo-Caribbeans do not speak of spirit mediumship neither, but they'll use words such as manifestation or to play when a deity or spirit embodies them. I'll talk a little bit more about that and show it as well in some videos. Indo-Caribbeans in the US especially speak negatively about spirit possession, something that's unwanted and most likely involving malevolent or evil spirits. Indo-Caribbeans have historically regarded Kali worship to be lower in status, as I'm sure you are gaining from this presentation, due to negative perceptions that I've described, but also because of their similarities with Afro-Caribbean religions. And here I'm thinking also of where you have spirit mediumship and centrality of drumming, for instance, with Cuban Santeria, Dominican Palo, Haitian Voodoo, and others. These negative notions have persisted in contemporary context in North America, and of course in Guyana and Trinidad still. And these particular practices, let's get into them now. First of all, here's some images of the deity. This is in a temple in Queens where I've done field work for many years. And I'll explain the significance of why she is named Mariamman and not Kali in a moment. But this is what one of them, the statuettes, they're called Murtis, what they look like in one particular temple. This is another temple in Queens. Some of these statuettes are imported from India, and that there's a lot of prestige around that as well, if they're brought directly from India. And so she's in the middle there with various per consort, which, if you would like to know more, I can tell you more later. And then this is an older Morty in Guyana, in an area called Letterkenny, where I've done research, and you can see that the color of the deity is different, and also this is actual carpentry work from what I've been told from the late 19th century. And another one also in another area, again, different painting and aesthetic preferences. We could get more into details, the objects she's holding and how she's being portrayed. And a lot of New Yorkers today prefer to see her like this, which they describe as in her sweet form, rather than a ferocious form, which is often associated with Kali. Okay, so to get into these, to the music, there's thunderous tapu drumming. These are the tapu drums that are so vital to facilitating worship, facilitating manifestation of the deity, the presiding deity, and other deities. Again, this is in Guyana. You might recognize the Morty that I just showed. Some more. And then there are also Udke singers or Udke drumming that facilitates worship as well. And here in this particular photo, they are trying to invoke Mariamman through the head priest to come up on the priest. They're calling mother here through particular songs. Other practices here that I'm encompassing within sonic practices, animal sacrifice. This is in Guyana, although it takes place in Brooklyn and Queens as well. Self-flagellation is a part of these processes as well. The supplicant will be entranced and asked to be whipped. Alcohol and cigarette offerings. This was some photos taken recently, actually, after the pandemic, and taking place in someone's backyard in Brooklyn. Cigarettes, alcohol, very common to Madrasi worship, and taking oath ceremonies. Taking oath also in religions in Jamaica, actually, in which supplicants prove their devotion by placing this lit camphor into their mouths. It's done 3 times. The Rufa knows that, this is to prove that you truly are entranced. And so another photo here. This is also taking place in Queens. So Madrasi religious practitioners, they've internalized these dominant notions held by Indo-Caribbean adherents of Hindu orthodoxy, who accuse them sometimes of performing obia. And obia is to be defined as West African derivation. That's how it's generally known among Caribbeans and scholars, of course, scholarly discourse. So to be called obia, a negative thing, some kind of voodoo, superstition itself, rituals that are not Hindu or fall outside the purview of legitimate Hinduism. This is the slide that we wanted to go. Today, Madrasi religious subjectivities, racial subjectivities, they've been exacerbated in the North American context. And that's a lot of what I'm looking at in my work. As Indo-Guyanese Americans are subject to discrimination by South Asian Americans who they view their forms of embodiment again as lost culture. It's a racialized marker of time and migration. And also when mistaken as Black on the basis of a Black-white racial continuum within North American multiculturalism. These states of anxiety point to their experiences of alterity and identity here in the United States and in Guyana. So while Madrasi religion is a source of anxiety, though, I argue that its sonic practices, its music, simultaneously creates this space of diasporic belonging that could be transgressive, a kind of diasporic healing. Thought by scholars have been in decline. Instead, Madrasi religion in North America is proliferating, particularly in New York City, where Guyanese are the 5th largest immigrant group in the city, the 2nd largest in Queens. And increasingly, and particularly in North America again, Guyanese Madrasis newly emphasize a South Indian and an ancient Tamil origins of their worship, newly emphasizing her Tamil name Mariamman instead of Kali. And for instance, here's an example of how particular kinds of drumming facilitate the head priest to manifest in the South Indian Tamil language, ancient Tamil language that she sings as she delivers messages. So let's see if this video will work. Let's see how this goes. So this is a temple in Queens. They're about to be pulled up on. What the top of drumming actually sounds like. In fact, it's quite loud. Like if you stand in these spaces in New York, you will feel the rhythms within you, pulsating literally on the surface of your skin. In Guyana, of course, these rituals take place outside, so they're not as loud, but they are still very loud. You can hear them from one town to the next, and it brings people to the festival that may not know anything about this religion. So that's one example for you. Another one here, in this particular clip, what's important here is that a relative of the head priest, she began to go into trance at her house. She wasn't quite sure what was happening, who she was manifesting. So in this religious complex, people learned who the deities are, learn the identities of them, and also learn that they come from South India, that they have a South Indian ethnic origin as well. So in this particular ritual, the drumming and the music, again, it's so important to invoke her. And the goal is that she would become entranced and then embody the deity who has been with her, and that she would vocalize who that deity is by name. Just give you an idea of that. Okay, so in that clip, which I'm just going to end short, I mean, they're trying to talk to the deity through her. She's not able to say the name quite yet. Sometimes it takes many years actually to develop the deity fully. And there are also translators there. That's a very important person in the rituals who translate the ancient Tamil language to English, because everyone speaks English. And for her, that was her first time going to Guyana, actually, from New York. And that was a very eye-opening experience for her. I don't think on that trip she was able to learn who she was manifesting, but I think she plans to go again. Even though she could have done that in New York, she's wanted to go to Guyana. Many people feel that there's still like a powerful presence in like the epicenter being in Guyana still. And again, that priest is based in New York. So he goes once, maybe twice a year to Guyana and officiates the temples, is in charge of the temples from afar, from New York City. I can go more into some more details of that later. So let's, I'll keep talking about a little bit more here. These are some more rituals that I can go into more detail with, but there are these other overtly healing rituals, such as jaw raying. Here, this individual on the right is manifesting one of the deities in Mariamman's cohort, and using these leaves made out of neem. And there's drumming happening during this time, but also singing to the supplicant. And again, needing usually a translator. Not in every temple do you have a translator, but the ones that are really pushing this narrative and where this narrative is very important, this has become the norm. And this is just another example. People might go up to the head pujari, the head priest here, who has the rope around his neck and the mala, the garlands around, and they're there to Christian, their daughter actually, or to bring her to be blessed by the head presiding deity. This was in Brooklyn. I know that I'm kind of jumping back and forth with locations, but I think it is important to note that sometimes it might look like they're in Guyana, they might look like they're in New York, and sometimes the goal is for these temples to look like they're in Guyana. And maybe that overlapping and conflation is also another aesthetic goal, but I won't get into that right now. Okay. I think you should hear one last clip of my research on the singing that takes place. So again, when supplicants come up to Mother, one individually, private usually, she sings the messages to them. They can be prophetic, they can be guidelines, they can be blessings in general. It really depends on the individual's needs and context.
It's a different time and you like Yanka.
Okay, so Usually, again, these are private affairs. No one really wants to know what's being translated. They allowed me to record this, which was generous of them. Okay. And I just wanted to show a few photographs here of just how much this narrative has become very, very prestigious and salient. So back in Guyana, there's been attempts to build new temples that resemble the architecture of temples in South India. This term gopalapurams, the stacked style on top of the roofing there. New signage that's been within the last decade to paint Tamil words onto the temple. This was a really new temple about 3 years ago, just under construction. So this aesthetic appeal, right, that has grown so prestigious. And this was an example of the work that I've done online as well, and how Guyanese and Trinidadians are communicating with people that are outside, right, of the West Indies and places like South Asia or elsewhere in the South Asian diaspora, asking, where is this? Guyana. This place is just like in Tamil Nadu. I actually thought it was Tamil Nadu, and Guyanese and other Tamil-speaking people are sharing memories together or talking about some of the details of these places, which Guyanese are very excited about, of course. And in another example here, in my work, I also look at how the impact of recordings and the circulation of Tamil films about the goddess. There's there are a couple of vintage films, like from the 70s and 80s, that are particularly popular amongst Guyanese and Trinidadians. This one's Ati Shakti. And on the left-hand side, Guyanese American friend of mine, who she's really great at making her own outfits. Actually, this was a Madrasi Day parade in New York City. There's only been 2 or 3 of them, but this was one right before the pandemic, and this was her own hashtags: South Indian village look, tribal, yellow and red, Duttalai, which is neem leaves. So I also wanted to explain a little bit about, just how popular these songs have become in Guyana as well. Guyana is a place where the internet was really only widespread in like 2012. So access to these songs was readily available until relatively recently. And now people are learning all about these songs. And I just wanted to show or have this clip here of a song that he was talking to me about. I believe it's queued up. Let's see.
About these songs, but not the Hindi versions.
I love
The
them.
Hindi versions.
I love them. I feel like I can go anywhere. I see anything. I can do anything I hear them.
Wow.
Yeah. I feel like mother come in me and me gone summon fire. Yeah.
Wow.
My tongue gone far. Yes, like it gone to where she is.
Yeah.
And he went on to talk about some of these songs, and it's better when he's saying it.
And I like to hear the hot Tamil song. The hottest song I could hear.
What is that? What's that?
They like to sing it like more powerful than anything. Like in the movies, like if Mariamman movie, like when a girl singing them songs, but mother done just like that.
Like all you hear.
He himself is a priest and operates a small temple in Guyana, and also in Guyanese vernacular, it's called an antiman, which is homosexual, and a lot of, not a lot, but I've met many people for whom this religion is conducive to expressing their sexuality in these ways. I wish I had more time, of course. But let me just end with the research, and I want to get into some of the broader relevance in the last maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And then I had some examples that I want to talk about relevant to the course. So let's see how much time we have. Just to reiterate, I've conducted fieldwork in New York City, Guyana, and Trinidad online as well, and what people refer to as virtual or digital ethnography. And in the course, a lot of my training is in this method of ethnography, which involves interviewing people, which involves participating in some of these musical and ritual events, and also other kinds of methods, which I'll explore in the course together with you. And you know, just to kind of sum up some of my ideas and my arguments for this, I've documented the role of music of a new Indian diaspora narrative that's become increasingly prestigious, and it's helped to create a transnational network between New York City and Guyana to the point where it's revitalized this religion in Guyana. Ultimately, I argue that the sonic embodiment of this diaspora narrative, it affords Guyanese Madrasis new forms of visibility, legitimacy, and legibility. Throughout my work, I analyzed what the effective dimensions of these Madrasi music, you know, what do these sonic practices actually do? How are they meaningful? How are they transformative? And of course, you know, there are other dynamics involved in which people are heightened, right? In terms of what are the correct practices, thinking about what is authentic. But in the end, it's more than about acquiring knowledge. Madrasi sonic practices have now taken on a new meaning, becoming an aesthetic of audacity in many ways, able to live out these alternative states of being and becoming South Indian. So I think my research speaks more broadly to the vital invocations of diaspora, of Asia, of South Asia, through music and other sonic practices. While the Guyanese Madrasi account is certainly unique, it's also echoed in the stories and experiences of Asian and South Asian America. For one, phenotype matters, and music and sound, depending on the context, can reify or it can transgress boundaries and social structures, sometimes in more provocative ways when ideas are verbalized or when there are language barriers or limitations. In other words, just to quote a couple of scholars relevant here, Jeremy Wallach and Esther Clinton, they write, quote, "There's more to an individual's consciousness, identity, and aesthetic choices than his or her degree of power or powerlessness." And as Lisa Lowe, I'm sure maybe you've come across her, I hope in your coursework, there is no single Asian American history, and nobody is born Asian or South Asian American, because, quote, "It's not an essence, it's not a universal, unified category, but perhaps better thought of as a strategic category to make interventions about the ways people have been racialized in particular contexts." So at this point, this is where I wanted to get into the course I plan to teach this spring, which is titled Sonic Reverberations of Asia, South Asia, America, in which we'll navigate these contexts together, and where these ideas, meanings of Asia, America are produced, consumed in and through music. And together, I did have this for you to get read along. And together, I just thought I wanted to emphasize some of these today with you. For instance, how music and sound is mobilized within the history and stories of Asian immigration and migration to the US. And I want to play an example for each of these. So if you can now hop over. So thinking about, right, the mobilization for histories on stories of immigration. In this first clip, they're thankfully ordered, I think, yeah. In this first clip, I thought of this example of yeah, that's okay. It's a band, actually, yeah, so it's a band named Material Support. They're based in New York City. The lead singer is a Filipino American, and she sings about the Bali Bangkang boxes, which are boxes within Filipino communities that are sent often by the mother, but by a parent or a family member in the United States or elsewhere outside of the Philippines, packaged and sent back to family in the Philippines. And in this particular song, this band is talking about hands off of our boxes, basically the scrutiny that we get. And on the fourth slide on the bottom, this is what she made an image, a print screen of what this box could look like. And there's actually a gun in there, there's Spam in there, all sorts of materials in there that you might think of ways in which, you know, this kind of exchange, while it's necessary, is also one in which, you know, it reminds them of their lack in many ways as well. So I just want to play a little bit of this for you, and I also would like, for those that are there remotely to kind of think about some questions that comments that you have just of this example. I can also steer the conversation as well, but.
Hands off, hands off, hands off, balik bayan bang. Hands off, hands off, hands off, balik bayan bang. Sinitabi ko lang ang lahat ng mugo at buhat bawis ko sa isang katitak na kahon. At basta-basta bubuksan mo, anong klaseng pangmasa to yan? Sa tawag mo pagkubayani, lahat ng sakripisyo namin ay ikaw pala ang may-ari. Hands off.
So in that short clip, this gives you an idea of what, how we might critically listen to and talk about music, which is so ethereal. First of all, we might think of why this kind of sound, for instance, why this genre, why this kind of music? Is it fitting? Is it not fitting? Of course, you know, in a classroom setting, you'd get way more into the context, right, of Filipino American experiences, histories of migration, in particular to these communities. But you know, in ways it's been analyzed, for instance, is thinking about the harshness of sound. What could the harshness of the grit of the sound? How could that convey ideas of marginalization, of liminality, of just struggle in the everyday life, but also a presence, right? A loud presence. Also talking about the volume of the music, it being loud. We are here. We are not leaving. These are some of the ways you might talk about music in that sense, in terms of its the actual sound quality. But also, there are so many other things to discuss. And if anyone has a comment, this is where I would like any of the students or anyone to, you know, if this is how we might jumpstart some of these conversations together. But feel free to jump in. I'll have a few other examples as well. But has anyone heard of music like this before?
It takes me back to like good old punk, right? Which is not what I associate with Asian America. It's mostly white punk is what I hear.
Absolutely. Yeah, this history of funk in the United States in the 70s and 80s, primarily by working or middle class white communities. But here in this new context with new messages relevant to particular communities, it could also speak back to that dominant structure, or dominant racial structure. Any other comments?
I have a linguistics background, so when I looked at the title, I saw hands off like an exclamation point. And then usually with like exclamation points, it's like, you know, you're saying something like a certain way, like you're maybe like your volume is like increasing, or like you're shouting or something like that. And I feel like that's like very reflective of like the music that's really sound itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's intentional, definitely the title for songs as well. But yeah, that's a really good point. And linguistically, right, it's both English and also Tagalog as well. And that combination of those languages in a single track to communicate, you know, with family maybe as well, or for Filipinos listening, and having access to this music as well.
There's something in the chat. I don't know
Oh yeah, sure.
if we wanna, if anybody wants to put anything in the chat, they certainly can. Oh, right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's just go ahead and play another example or two before we end, because I know we're getting close to time.
Yeah. Stephanie, I
yeah.
had a question.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
It wasn't about this piece, but the drumming, I was just really fascinated by, and I wonder, is it important for first or second generation Guyanese to teach their children that drumming? I mean, when does one learn? How does one learn?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. So learning how to drum is important to families. As you probably have noticed, it's pretty patriarchal. It's usually boys that learn how to drum, and the ways in which men, I mean, there are some women now, but the ways that people learn to drum is by watching, observing as young children. And parents will encourage them if they feel that they have some sort of musicianship and want to develop that. Often their own fathers played tapu drum, and they learn by observing. A lot of the rituals are learned by observing. Even singing the songs, you must be present, listen to the songs, even try to listen to the singing through the drumming, which can be difficult, and take many, many years of observing it. I know how to play tapu drum. I learned from some of these men, but that's a very special case. My own positionality as a woman to drum at the time, at least 8 to 9 years ago, was uncommon, and I was not allowed to drum in temples itself. But tapu drumming is encouraged, although there is some stigma still to drumming. Let alone Madrasi religion itself. There is some idea of it being associated with caste, or it being associated generations ago in Guyana with lower castes that were not allowed to enter temples physically. They had to stand outside of the temples because they were dealing with animal carcass that was made in the construction of these drums. But the drumming is so infectious, and I'm not just saying that. I mean, this is how people feel about the drumming. They want to learn how to drum. They want to be one of the tapu drummers, but not everybody can be. People take turns. The best ones are selected at certain temples. So there's prestige around this. Yeah, they're paid, as part of.
And it's primarily male.
Primarily males, although it's starting to change a bit here and there. But at more traditional temples, it's men's that drum. Yeah. Good question. Press for time. Back in the PowerPoint, I was just describing that another topic of the course that I wanted to cover was the impact of the transnational circulation of Asian and South Asian American music. And a particular example that I can think of, which in the course I'll get more into, is the music of a particular group in ethno-linguistic groups in North India, particularly Punjabi music called Bhangra. And in the United States, there are DJs who have recreated Bhangra into a remix form that is relevant to them as a second generation South Asian American. And probably one of the most well-known. Yeah, that's okay. Oh, where's the email? Oh, there it is. Yeah, is DJ Rick? That's not that one. Yeah.
On that one already. Yeah, you click on that one. This is the fourth one. Fourth one.
They're different, so that's good. What you were just listening to was not Bhangra. This is, but the reason why I'm playing this clip is because you hear from DJ Rekha herself. You will hear some Bhangra, which I'll cue. I'll let you know.
Sometimes I'll have one song that I've been listening to incessantly, and I'm like, I can't wait for the moment in the night I'm gonna play that song.
We are here with DJ Rekha.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Tell me a little bit about how you got started.
It started out with a love for music and a desire to crush the next DJ in the community.
Here you begin to hear a little bit of Bhangra, just a few more seconds of this.
My cousins lived here from India. We saw other kids in our communities building sound systems. We thought we could do it better. We scraped our nickels. I broke in my first credit card. The rest is history. But it really started with the love of hip hop and the love of Bhangra music, which I was introduced to as a teenager by my mom.
We are here at the launch.
Okay. And so in her music, as she mentions, I mean, she really has created this genre of live DJ dance parties, which there is this incorporation of hip hop, of remixes with a traditional folk music of Bhangra. If we had more time, I could play a clip. Do we have time? Can we go over 5 or no?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Is that Andaz? Is that like a Indian show? Or
So this is a track, a song that she created with another artist. And that's what you're hearing in the background.
no,
Yeah.
the show.
Oh, the show itself. Yes, you are correct. It is. She is a.
What is that show? Is that an Indian show or?
I don't think it's an Indian show, but like an Indian.
Because like they have,
For high energy, entertaining South Asian lifestyle show on
Yeah.
Sony.
Oh, it's
yeah.
on Sony.
Yeah, so that's a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So there's this quintessential song. It's a little dated now, but this gives you a clear idea of so a song that was taking the traditional forms of Bhangra and then remixed. In this case, it was in the UK, but I think it might be good to compare and contrast North American and UK experiences. But then brought into the North American audience with the collaboration with Jay-Z. So it's an added layer, but we at least can hear what Bhangra dance music sounds like.
It's the rock in the building. Khalid, Ramal, Terrell in the house. Yes. Live from United States, Brooklyn, New York, it's your boy. Young. The nephews is in the house. As soon as the beat drop, we got the streets locked overseas. A Punjabi MC in the rock. I came to see the mommies in the spot. On the count of 3, drop your.
Okay, so you can get an idea of what Bhangra remix music sounds like, and there was a lot of talk around this particular track as well, both positive and negative. And there are certain kinds of ideas of talking about appropriation, for instance, which we'll talk about in my class. How much can we borrow from other musics? How much can a mainstream audience take or contribute to diasporic musics as well? But this was super, super popular across the board and really allowed for at this particular time for communities to engage with one another in new ways, I think, in the coded hip hop world, also South Asian Americans, to find that space together and dance together. I also, was thinking about in this class, I really want to focus on representations of Asian Americans in popular culture, in terms of gender, class, sexuality. In this example, which I apologize for the fuzziness of it, I could not find a better one. But here you will see and hear Japanese traditional taiko drumming, which is embedded into and used for this Mitsubishi car commercial.
Introducing the all-new 2006 Mitsubishi Eclipse. Available.
Before I talk any more about this, any comments?
Wait, were there some women taiko drummers?
Yeah, they were women, yeah, playing drums here.
Because I know traditionally it's a male.
Yeah, it's often male dominated too. Yeah, traditionally. So yeah, that's a really good point here. I chose this example particularly talking about to talk about gender and sexuality. Any comments? Yes, about too. Yeah, there are these
That was really
tropes.
strange.
Yeah, there are these tropes of the hypersexuality of the Asian American woman and then the demasculinization of Asian American men. Again, tropes, right, that can be challenged and have been challenged. But in this car commercial, how provocative, right? And at the end, the yell and scream as well, and also the acceleration of the music, the increasing volume, the density of the rhythms, to this climactic moment. In the clip makes you want to buy the car. Back in 2006. But yeah, the car incorporation.
Like featured, right? Like they come with the car.
Oh, the drums come with the car, yeah. Of course. And the women, they come with the car too, yeah. But in this way, in which even within this commercial realm, right, music and traditional Japanese drumming is utilized to help sell a car for someone that wants to take on this kind of energy, you could say, but against stereotypical ideas about fierceness and hypersexuality again. Not to be completely negative about it, but I also wanted to cover music for protest, for challenging conventions. How is music part of dealing with social problems, political problems? Encountered by Asian Americans, but also in encounters with Afro-Asian collectives or Asian, Latinx, and Caribbean communities, East Asian and South Asian American solidarities. I'm really interested to see what people do, what they decide to do when people from different, maybe musical backgrounds come together to create new music, new dance music, new classical music, various genres, of course, that we'll cover. But what are the choices being made that people want it to sound a certain way, to present it to the public, to present it to certain audiences? I find that very fascinating. More examples, but I have to stop at some point. So I'll stop there. And I just want to say that, together, we're going to listen critically and reflexively, reading also novels, literature about music, Asian American and South Asian American music makers, to understand these and other phenomena, in particular relation to larger frames through a global lens. We're looking at histories of colonialism in the global South or racial capitalism in the US. And I really look forward to exploring these issues together in this class. And perhaps we might move Asian American studies and the study of music in exciting and daring ways. So thank you for your patience today. Thank you for patience with PowerPoint. Yeah.
Do we want to see if I think Connie was on, if she did.
Yeah.
Connie, if you're still with us, if you have any questions.
Stuff's here.
Oh yeah, of course. Do you have a question? I think the other person left.
Connie. Oh, okay. Do I have a question? I was just very quickly for me. I'm not quite sure your tactic in terms of research, but if you were researching during COVID, kind of like how did COVID I was kind of curious about that.
It's a great question.
If it did.
I was actually finished with my with my field work before COVID. But I did do a little bit. It's kind of hard to say no. That's one of the issues of doing field work in the place where you live. I didn't do work. I didn't visit people for a year and a half. But as I mentioned, I visited one person's backyard. There's a small number of people. We were outside. I did attend some funerals that took place of they're called elder heads, but those that passed away in the Guyanese community. They're very important to this religious tradition, and everyone was masked up. I was there. I recorded some songs that are important to funerary processions. It takes place, but I think it's up to people's discretion, more family oriented. So I was fortunate. I'm sure others could speak to being the thick of field work during COVID. A lot of it, I'm sure, has transitioned to online ethnography again, doing work online, engaging online, and just creating settings that are conducive and safe. Right, doing the work. But music is an interesting object of study because people have had to navigate ways of playing or singing. Apparently, singing the projectile, the speed at which germs are projectile from your mouth is faster with hundreds of whatever. So in different ways of covering the face, covering the instruments, creating different kinds of masks to wear, say for bloom instruments. It's been kind of a unique situation as it's been in other areas, but it's still happening, just in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Appreciate this.
Of course. Yeah, it was so wonderful. It was so great.
So thank you. It's very nice of you. Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of want to take the course too.
I just wanted to keep going with examples of our stuff.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the recording, but thank
Yeah.
you. so
Yeah, you're
much.
welcome.
Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Thanks for having me.